In 1955, in the heart of Wisconsin, a young woman faced an impossible choice. Her name was Joanne Schiebel, and she was carrying the child of Abdul Fattah John Jandali, a Syrian graduate student. Their relationship faced fierce opposition from both families, particularly Joanne's father, who threatened to cut off her college education if she married the Syrian academic. In this moment of crisis, Joanne made a decision that would alter the course of technological history. She would give her baby up for adoption. The infant, born on February 24th, 1955, would become Steve Jobs. But there was one critical condition attached to his adoption. The adoptive parents must be college graduates. Fate, however, had different plans. Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class couple from the San Francisco Bay Area, stepped forward to adopt the baby. Paul was a machinist who never finished high school, and Clara was a bookkeeper. When Joanne discovered their educational background, she initially refused to sign the adoption papers. Only after the Jobs couple made a solemn promise to send the child to college did she relent. The Santa Clara Valley, where young Steve would grow up, was a vastly different place from what it would later become. In the 1950s and early 1960s, it was still primarily agricultural land, covered with sprawling orchards of apricots and prunes stretching as far as the eye could see. The air was crystalline clear, offering unobstructed views from one end of the valley to the other. Jobs would later recall it as really paradise and the most wonderful place in the world to grow up. Paul and Clara proved to be devoted parents, creating a stable and loving home for their adopted son. Paul, despite his limited formal education, was a skilled mechanic who taught Steve the importance of craftsmanship and attention to detail. In their garage, he would show young Steve how to build and repair things, inadvertently planting the seeds of what would become an obsession with product design and quality. But there was something different about Steve from the very beginning. His intelligence was apparent early on, so much so that his elementary school teachers suggested he skip 2 grades. His parents, showing wisdom and foresight, opted for just 1 grade advancement, moving him past 5th grade to avoid too much social isolation from his peers. Even as a child, Steve displayed an uncanny ability to persuade and manipulate others, a trait that would later become legendary in Silicon Valley. One telling incident occurred during elementary school on Hawaiian Shirt Day. Steve had forgotten to wear the appropriate attire, but rather than stand out, he managed to convince another student to give him their Hawaiian shirt. The other child ended up being the only one out of place in the class photo, while Steve blended perfectly with his peers. This early display of his reality distortion field, his ability to bend situations and people to his will, would become a defining characteristic of his leadership style. His persuasive abilities often manifested in elaborate pranks. Once, he created convincing posters announcing a fake "Bring Your Pet to School Day," resulting in complete chaos as students arrived with their various animals, much to the bewilderment of the teachers and administration. These weren't merely childish pranks. They demonstrated Jobs' early understanding of how to influence people's behavior through careful presentation and messaging. Young Steve was drawn to both technology and the humanities, a unique combination that would later prove crucial to his success. He devoured the works of Shakespeare, Plato, and Melville, while simultaneously becoming fascinated with electronics. He joined the Hewlett-Packard Explorers Club, where he worked on electronic kits and began to understand the fundamentals of computing and electronics. One of his most remarkable traits was his intense focus. When something caught his interest, he pursued it with an almost otherworldly determination. This focus often led him to ignore conventional boundaries and social expectations. When he needed a part for an Explorers Club project, he discovered it was manufactured by Hewlett-Packard. Rather than accept that such components might be out of reach for a young student, he found Bill Hewlett's home phone number in the Palo Alto phone directory and called him directly. Back then, people didn't have unlisted numbers, Jobs later recalled. So I looked up Bill Hewlett in Palo Alto and called him at home, and he answered and chatted with me for 20 minutes. He got me the parts, and he also got me a job in their plant. This audacious move was characteristic of Jobs' approach to obstacles. He simply didn't recognize them as barriers that couldn't be overcome. The same determination manifested in his high school years. When he needed a part for an electronics class project, he called the manufacturer in Detroit, presenting himself as a designer testing new products. The company air freighted the component to him immediately. This ability to create opportunities through sheer force of will would become one of his greatest assets. In high school, a pivotal friendship would form that would change the course of technological history. Through a mutual friend, Steve Jobs met Stephen Wozniak, known as Woz. Though 5 years older than Jobs, Woz shared his passion for electronics and innovation. Their personalities, however, couldn't have been more different. Where Jobs was charismatic and naturally commanding, Woz was shy and reserved. While Jobs saw technology as a means to change the world, Woz viewed engineering as an end in itself, the pure joy of creation being its own reward. Despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, Jobs and Woz formed an immediate bond. They shared an irreverent sense of humor and a love for both electronics and music, spending countless hours hunting down rare Bob Dylan recordings and devising elaborate technical pranks. One of their most memorable creations was a TV signal disruptor that could scramble television reception from a distance. They would stand outside college dormitories, using their device to manipulate students' TV reception, delighting in making people hop on one foot, or maintain physical contact with their sets to maintain reception. An early example of Jobs' fascination with controlling user behavior through technology. But their most significant early collaboration was the creation of the Blue Box, a device that would essentially serve as a preview of their future partnership. The Blue Box exploited a vulnerability in the telephone system by replicating the tones used to route long-distance calls, effectively allowing free long-distance calling from any phone. Woz, with his technical brilliance, engineered a digital version of the device that was more reliable than existing solutions. The components cost about $40 to assemble. Jobs, displaying his early business acumen, saw beyond the mere technical achievement. I got together the rest of the components, like the casing and power supply and keypads, and figured out how we could price it, Jobs recalled. He set the price at $150, a markup that would presage Apple's future pricing strategies. Their marketing approach was equally clever. They would enter college dorms asking for a fictional person named George, who was supposedly interested in buying their device. When told George wasn't there, they would demonstrate the Blue Box to whoever answered, often making a sale on the spot. This venture, though technically illegal, provided a blueprint for their future success. It demonstrated Woz's technical genius, combined with Jobs' business instincts, marketing savvy, and understanding of how to transform technical innovations into consumer products. The Blue Box venture ended after a potentially dangerous encounter with a customer who pulled a gun on them, but the lesson was clear. They made an effective team. As high school drew to a close, Jobs faced pressure from his parents to attend college. They had promised his biological mother that he would receive a college education, and this was the one area where they insisted on having their way. Jobs, in a characteristic display of passive-aggressive behavior, chose Reed College in Oregon, one of the most expensive liberal arts colleges in the country. Despite the financial strain it would place on his working-class parents, they honored their commitment and paid his tuition. At Reed, Jobs fully embraced the counterculture movement of the era. He experimented with LSD, visited communes, and adopted extreme dietary habits, sometimes subsisting solely on specific foods like apples or carrots for weeks at a time. His obsession with diet led him to bizarre conclusions. After reading that a meat-free diet eliminated body odor, he decided he no longer needed to shower regularly, despite complaints from those around him. Jobs' relationship with formal education was troubled from the start. He bristled at the required courses and authority in general. When visiting him at Reed, Woz found Jobs frustrated with his course schedule. "They're making me take all these courses," Jobs complained. Woz's matter-of-fact response, "Yes, that's what they do in college." This highlighted the fundamental disconnect between Jobs' independent nature and traditional educational structures. After just one semester, Jobs dropped out officially, but continued to audit classes that interested him, particularly a calligraphy course that would later influence Apple's groundbreaking approach to typography. This period of his life, though seemingly directionless, would later prove crucial to his development. As he would later say in his famous Stanford commencement speech, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." After leaving Reed College, Jobs searched for direction and meaning. His old friend from Reed, Bob Friedland, who would later become a billionaire through founding Ivanhoe Mines, convinced him that the answers he sought could be found in India. But first, Jobs needed money for the journey. He walked into Atari's lobby in 1974, barefoot and disheveled, and refused to leave until they gave him a job. Al Alcorn, Atari's chief engineer, was summoned to deal with this unusual situation. "I was told we've got a hippie kid in the lobby," Alcorn recalled. "He says he's not going to leave until we hire him. Should we call the cops or let him in?" Despite Jobs' unconventional appearance, Alcorn decided to give him a chance, a decision that would prove prescient. At Atari, Jobs demonstrated an early gift for simplifying complex designs, creating games that users found intuitive and engaging. However, his interpersonal skills needed work. His tendency to criticize others harshly and his refusal to shower due to his strict fruitarian diet made him deeply unpopular with co-workers. Management eventually moved him to the night shift, where he would encounter fewer people. When Jobs approached Alcorn about funding his spiritual journey to India, his boss found a creative compromise. Atari was having problems with their European distributors, particularly in Munich. Alcorn offered to send Jobs to Germany first, making his subsequent trip to India more affordable. The German businessmen, however, were put off by Jobs' unorthodox appearance and behavior. When they complained to Alcorn, he simply asked, did he solve the problem? When they admitted he had, Alcorn replied with characteristic dry humor, "Well, if you've got any more problems, you just call me. I got more guys just like him." Jobs finally made his way to India in search of spiritual enlightenment. It was a transformative journey, though perhaps not in the way he expected. The guru he sought had died just weeks before his arrival, but Jobs spent 7 months immersing himself in Indian culture, attending religious festivals and exploring monasteries. While he didn't find the enlightenment he sought, the experience deepened his appreciation for Eastern philosophy and intuitive wisdom, themes that would influence his approach to product design and business throughout his life. The trip also reinforced Jobs' tendency toward extreme behaviors. Just as he had thrown himself completely into his fruitarian diet and his rejection of personal hygiene, he now threw himself fully into Eastern spirituality. This pattern of total commitment would become a defining characteristic of his leadership style. When Jobs believed in something, he pursued it with an intensity that could both inspire and overwhelm those around him. Upon returning to Silicon Valley, Jobs discovered that Atari was willing to rehire him, a testament to both his technical abilities and the uncommonly open-minded culture of the 1970s tech industry. Meanwhile, his friend Woz had joined the Homebrew Computer Club, a gathering of technology enthusiasts who shared a vision of making computers accessible to everyday people. At the time, computers were primarily massive mainframes owned by governments and large corporations. The idea of a personal computer seemed almost absurd to most people. But at one homebrew computer club meeting, Woz made a breakthrough that would change everything. He managed to type a few keys on a keyboard and for the first time in history, saw the characters appear immediately on a screen in front of him. I typed a few keys on the keyboard and I was shocked, Woz recalled. The letters were displayed on the screen. It was the first time in history anyone had typed a character on a keyboard and seen it show up on their own computer screen right in front of them. This moment, though it might seem unremarkable today, was revolutionary. Until then, home computers typically used punch cards or flashing lights to communicate in binary code. Woz, true to the open source ethos of the Homebrew Computer Club, wanted to freely share his breakthrough. But Jobs saw something bigger. Just as he had done with the Blue Box, he recognized the commercial potential in Woz's innovation. He proposed they start a company together, using a persuasive approach that demonstrated his deep understanding of Woz's psychology. Even if we lose our money, we'll have a company, Jobs told Woz. For once in our lives, we'll have a company. The appeal of two best friends starting a business together resonated with Woz. I was excited to think about us like that, Woz later recalled. I knew right then that I'd do it. How could I not? In 1976, in the humble confines of the Jobs family garage in Los Altos, California, Apple Computer was born. Paul Jobs, Steve's adoptive father, cleared out his beloved vintage cars to make room for what would become one of the most significant technological ventures in history. The company's name, suggested by Steve Jobs, was deceptively simple, yet memorable: Apple. The operation began with all the characteristics of a small family business. Clara Jobs and Steve's former girlfriends worked for minimal wages, helping to assemble circuit boards. Jobs demonstrated his early business acumen through aggressive negotiation with parts suppliers, haggling over pennies to secure the best possible deals for their components. His attention to detail and demand for perfection, traits that would later become legendary, were evident from the start. Their first product, the Apple I, represented a significant advance in personal computing, primarily due to Woz's innovative design that allowed characters to appear on a screen when typed. However, Jobs and Woz had different views on pricing. Woz, the engineer's engineer, wanted to sell the computer at manufacturing cost, sharing the technology as openly as possible. Jobs, the businessman, insisted on a healthy markup, setting the price at $666.66, a figure that reflected both their counterculture sensibilities and Jobs' understanding of the importance of memorable pricing. The Apple I came in a wooden case, looking more like a hobbyist project than a consumer product. Despite its rough appearance, they managed to sell several hundred units, a modest success that proved the concept viable. However, Jobs' vision extended far beyond the hobbyist market. During a computer convention, he observed competitors' products and had an epiphany. Personal computers needed to be friendly and approachable for the average consumer, not just engineering enthusiasts. This realization led to the development of the Apple II, the product that would truly launch Apple into the technological stratosphere. The inspiration for its design came from an unlikely source: a Cuisinart food processor Jobs spotted while walking through Macy's. The sleek, light-molded plastic case of the kitchen appliance suggested a way to make computers appear less intimidating and more at home in a domestic setting. As the company grew beyond the garage, Jobs recognized the need for experienced business leadership. He pursued Regis McKenna, a prominent Silicon Valley publicist whose work Jobs admired, with characteristic persistence. When McKenna's office initially brushed him off, Jobs called back almost daily for weeks, until he finally got through. This persistence paid off. McKenna not only took Apple on as a client, but also designed their iconic rainbow Apple logo and connected them with crucial early investors and executives. One of these connections was Mike Markkula, who would become instrumental in shaping Apple's marketing philosophy. Markkula developed a three-point marketing approach that would become fundamental to Apple's success. First was empathy, understanding customer needs better than any other company. Second was focus, eliminating unimportant opportunities to excel at the essential ones. Third was what Markkula called impute, the principle that people judge a product by how it is presented. As he explained, we may have the best product, the highest quality, the most useful software, etc., but if we present them in a slipshod manner, they will be perceived as slipshod. Jobs internalized these principles deeply. They aligned perfectly with his intuitive understanding of what made products great and would guide Apple's approach to product development and marketing for decades to come. The company also hired its first CEO, Michael Scott, whose primary responsibility was managing the increasingly volatile Jobs himself. By this time, Jobs was displaying the management style that would become both famous and infamous. He could be brutally critical, frequently reducing employees to tears with his harsh assessments of their work. He would arrive late to meetings, believing himself above such constraints, and his emotional outbursts became legendary. Yet despite these behaviors, he possessed an almost magical ability to motivate people to achieve what seemed impossible. The launch of the Apple II would prove to be a defining moment, not just for Apple, but for the entire personal computer industry. Jobs, understanding the importance of first impressions, paid a premium for a prime location at the 1977 West Coast Computer Fair. When the computers arrived with minor scratches and blemishes from shipping, Jobs demonstrated his legendary attention to detail, or obsession, depending on one's perspective. He kept several employees working through the night, meticulously polishing each unit until they achieved the perfection he demanded. This perfectionism extended beyond mere aesthetics. Jobs insisted that even the internal components, which users would rarely see, should be beautifully arranged. He had the entire team sign the inside of the case, telling them, "True artists sign their art." This seemingly small gesture had a profound effect on the team's mindset. As engineer Bill Atkinson later reflected, with moments like this, he got us seeing our work as art. The Apple II represented a quantum leap forward in personal computing. Its clean design, with the light-molded plastic case, made it look at home in any living room or office. More importantly, it was the first computer designed for everyday people, rather than hobbyists or engineers. It could display color graphics, had built-in basic programming language, and included a keyboard and power supply, features that seem obvious today but were revolutionary at the time. During this period of professional triumph, however, Jobs faced a personal crisis that would reveal a darker side of his character. His girlfriend, Chrisanne Brennan, became pregnant, and Jobs, despite his company's growing success, initially denied paternity of their daughter, Lisa. Even after a DNA test proved he was the father, Jobs remained largely absent from his daughter's life, providing minimal financial support despite his increasing wealth. This compartmentalization of his life, the ability to simply close off aspects of reality he didn't want to deal with, was characteristic of his psychological makeup. The success of the Apple II transformed the company. Apple moved out of the Jobs family garage and into proper offices. Sales skyrocketed, and the company began hiring employees at a rapid pace. The Apple II would eventually sell millions of units in various models, establishing Apple as a major player in the nascent personal computer industry. Jobs was now firmly established as a significant figure in Silicon Valley, but he was restless. The Apple II was primarily Woz's creation, and Jobs wanted something he could call his own. He began a new project called the Lisa, naming it after the daughter he was still largely refusing to acknowledge. a psychological complexity that, as Walter Isaacson noted, would have caused even the most jaded psychiatrist to do a double take. The Lisa project marked the beginning of Jobs' obsession with the graphical user interface, GUI. Traditional computers required users to type commands in text form, but Jobs envisioned something more intuitive. He learned that Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, was developing a revolutionary interface that used icons and windows that could be controlled with a mouse. Through a clever negotiation, Jobs arranged for Apple to invest in Xerox in exchange for a look at their technology. The Xerox executives, failing to recognize the value of what they possessed, agreed. When Jobs visited PARC, he was initially shown only basic features, but he immediately recognized they were holding back. He began going ballistic, demanding to see everything. His intensity was such that one engineer recalled, "He was hopping around so much, I don't know how he actually saw most of the demo, but he did, because he kept asking questions. He was the exclamation point for every step I showed." What Jobs saw that day would fundamentally alter the course of computing history. As he later recalled, "It was like a veil being lifted from my eyes. I could see what the future of computing was destined to be." He immediately understood that the graphical user interface would make computers accessible to everyone, not just technical experts. Jobs threw himself into the Lisa project with characteristic intensity, but his management style began to create serious problems. Engineers on the Lisa team found themselves constantly berated by Jobs, who would frequently declare their work completely worthless or label them bozos. His perfectionism, while often productive, began to border on the pathological. He would obsess over the smallest details, from the curve of the case to the exact shade of beige used for the hardware. Meanwhile, a philosophical divide was growing within the company. The Lisa team wanted to build a computer for business customers, who represented the most likely market for such an expensive machine. Jobs, however, insisted on creating what he called a Lisa for the people, a computer for the average consumer. This fundamental disagreement, combined with Jobs' increasingly erratic behavior, led Apple's CEO to remove him from the Lisa project. Rather than being devastated by this setback, Jobs found a new focus for his energy, a small project called the Macintosh, led by Jeff Raskin. The Macintosh team was working on creating an inexpensive, simple computer with a graphical user interface. Jobs, still energized by what he'd seen at Xerox PARC, saw the potential to create something revolutionary. In a move that would become characteristic of his leadership style, Jobs began poaching top talent from other Apple projects to join his Macintosh team. One day, he approached engineer Andy Hertzfeld's cubicle and declared, "You're working on the Macintosh now." When Hertzfeld protested that he needed to finish his current Apple II project, Jobs yanked the power cord from his computer, causing him to lose his unsaved work. "What's more important than working on the Macintosh?" Jobs demanded. He then physically moved Hertzfeld's computer to the Macintosh office, saying, "Welcome to the Mac team." Under Jobs' leadership, the Macintosh team developed a unique culture. They worked in a separate building with a pirate flag flying overhead, embodying Jobs' famous quote, "It's better to be a pirate than join the Navy." He fostered an environment of extreme dedication, pushing his team to achieve what seemed impossible through what became known as his reality distortion field, his ability to convince people that they could accomplish the seemingly impossible. This reality distortion field became legendary within Apple. As Debbie Coleman, a team member, explained, "He reminded me of Rasputin. He laser beamed in on you and didn't blink. It didn't matter if he was serving purple Kool-Aid. You drank it." The effect could be both empowering and dangerous. As Joanna Hoffman noted, reality distortion has motivational value, and I think that's fine. However, when it comes to setting a date in a way that affects the design of the product, then we get into real deep shit. The launch of the Macintosh in January 1984 would become a masterclass in product presentation and marketing. Jobs, working with the advertising agency Chiat Day, created what would become one of the most famous television commercials of all time. The 1984 advertisement, directed by Ridley Scott, depicted a dystopian world shattered by a rebellious heroine, a not-so-subtle suggestion that the Macintosh would liberate users from the conformity represented by IBM's dominance of the computer industry. When Apple's board first saw the commercial, they hated it. It didn't show the product, didn't explain its features, and seemed more like a short film than an advertisement. They asked Chiat Day to sell off the Super Bowl advertising slot. However, the agency, believing in the ad's power, only pretended to try selling the slot. The commercial aired during Super Bowl 18, creating an immediate sensation. It became the first advertisement to become a news story in its own right, with networks replaying it for free in news coverage. Exactly the kind of publicity Jobs had hoped to generate. The Macintosh itself was unveiled at Apple's shareholder meeting on January 24th, 1984. Jobs, wearing a double-breasted suit and bow tie, orchestrated a moment of theatre that would set the standard for all future tech product launches. The Macintosh was dramatically revealed from under a cloth cover, and then, in a groundbreaking moment, it spoke. "Hello, I'm Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag." The audience erupted in applause, witnessing what seemed like magic, but was actually the first demonstration of a computer with built-in text-to-speech capability. The initial reception was enthusiastic, with the Macintosh praised for its revolutionary interface and elegant design. However, problems soon emerged. Jobs' insistence on design perfection had led to some practical compromises. The computer was too expensive for many consumers, lacked sufficient ports for peripherals, and because Jobs insisted on a fanless design for silence, it often overheated. After an initial burst of excitement, sales began to slow dramatically, reaching only 10% of projected volumes. As the Macintosh struggled, Jobs' behavior became increasingly erratic. He would launch into vicious tirades, blaming everyone but himself for the product's disappointing performance. He entertained conspiracy theories about people trying to undermine him within Apple. The reality distortion field that had helped push the Macintosh team to achieve the impossible now seemed to be preventing Jobs from acknowledging and addressing real problems. One of his key employees wrote a devastating assessment. "He is a dreadful manager. Jobs regularly misses appointments. This is so well known as to almost be a running joke. He acts without thinking and with bad judgment. He does not give credit where due. Very often, when told of a new idea, he will immediately attack it and say it is worthless or even stupid and tell you that it is a waste of time to work on it. This alone is bad management. But if the idea is a good one, he will soon be telling people about it as though it was his own." As the Macintosh's sales continued to disappoint in 1985, tensions within Apple reached a breaking point. John Sculley, whom Jobs had personally recruited as CEO with the famous pitch, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" found himself increasingly at odds with his former ally. The board of directors, concerned about the company's financial performance, began to side with Sculley. The conflict came to a head during a fateful week in May 1985. Jobs, learning of plans to reorganize the company in a way that would diminish his role, attempted to orchestrate a boardroom coup against Sculley, while the CEO was away on business. Sculley, however, got wind of the plot and returned early, confronting Jobs in front of the board. In an emotional meeting, he asked the board to decide between them. The directors, one by one, sided with Sculley. Jobs was stripped of his operational duties and given the ceremonial title of Global Visionary, a role as meaningless as it sounded. He was moved to a small building he nicknamed Siberia, far from the main campus. For someone who had always seen himself as the heart and soul of Apple, this exile was unbearable. As summer progressed, Jobs became increasingly withdrawn, eating lunch alone and barely engaging with the company he had co-founded. During this period, Jobs underwent something of an existential crisis. He reached out to various people for advice, including Bob Dylan, who met with him in Jobs' unfurnished mansion in Woodside. Jobs had been living there for years but refused to furnish it. Another expression of his perfectionist tendencies. If it couldn't be perfect, he preferred nothing at all. By September 1985, exactly 12 years after he had started Apple with Woz, in his family's garage, Jobs resigned. As he later reflected, what had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. He sold all but one share of his Apple stock, a symbolic retention that maintained his status as a shareholder and allowed him to receive annual reports. The press painted Jobs as a fallen wunderkind, a cautionary tale of youth and arrogance. But Jobs saw his departure differently. While initially devastated, he began to feel a sense of liberation. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, he would later say. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. Within weeks of leaving Apple, Jobs began to formulate plans for his next venture. He still burned with the desire to create revolutionary technology, and he had a vision for a computer that would be even more advanced than the Macintosh. He gathered a small group of loyal Apple employees who believed in his vision and were willing to follow him into his new venture. One of his first calls was to Paul Rand, the legendary graphic designer who had created logos for IBM, ABC, and UPS. Despite Rand being under contract with IBM, Jobs' persistent calls to IBM's executives eventually secured permission to work with him. Jobs wanted the best, and he was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to get it. Jobs named his new company Next, and true to form, he obsessed over every detail from the start. He paid Rand $100,000 to design a single logo, insisting on perfection even in this initial stage. The designer delivered a 100-page brochure explaining every nuance of the logo's design, a level of detail that delighted Jobs' perfectionist sensibilities. While developing Next, Jobs made another significant acquisition that would prove transformative. He purchased the computer graphics division of Lucasfilm for $10 million. This division would become Pixar. The purchase came about because George Lucas, going through a divorce, needed to raise cash quickly. What Jobs initially saw was not an animation studio, but a computer company that could create specialized hardware and software for rendering 3D images. Jobs had a vision that every consumer would want a dedicated computer for creating and manipulating 3D graphics. The reality, however, proved quite different. The specialized computers Pixar produced were expensive and appealed to an extremely limited market. Despite the lack of commercial success, Jobs continued to believe in Pixar's potential, eventually investing $50 million of his own money to keep the company afloat, a testament to his determination and perhaps his unwillingness to admit failure. Meanwhile, at Next, Jobs was indulging his perfectionist tendencies to an unprecedented degree. The computer he envisioned would be a perfect cube, with completely straight edges and exact 90-degree angles. When engineers told him this was impossible to manufacture, he simply responded, "Make it possible." This insistence on perfection extended to every aspect of the computer's design and manufacturing process. In a move that epitomized both his attention to detail and his disconnect from practical considerations, Jobs insisted on building a fully automated factory to produce the next computer. The facility, featuring robots and spotless white walls, was a marvel of engineering, but it would never operate at anything close to capacity. Jobs spent millions on custom-made manufacturing robots that would sit largely idle. When Next finally unveiled its computer in 1988, Jobs orchestrated another theatrical product launch. Thousands of people waited for hours to enter the event. Jobs, ever the showman, told the audience they were about to witness an event that occurs only once or twice in a decade, a time when a new architecture is rolled out that is going to change the face of computing. The computer was indeed beautiful, a perfect black cube with exact angles. It could play music and handle advanced graphics. For the grand finale, Jobs had renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma perform a duet with the computer. The audience was enthralled. But there was a fundamental problem. The Next computer cost over $6,500 with a complete setup running over $10,000. Far too expensive for its target market of universities and students. Despite its commercial failure, the Next computer did produce one crucial innovation, its operating system. Under the leadership of Avi Tevanian, Next developed a spectacular operating system that was responsive, beautiful, and user-friendly. Though few people would actually use it at the time, this operating system would later prove crucial to Apple's revival. At Pixar, meanwhile, a different kind of innovation was taking place. The company had hired John Lasseter, a talented animator from Disney, initially hiding his role from Jobs under a technical title. However, once Jobs saw Lasseter's work, he became supportive, continuing to fund the animation department even as he was forced to make cuts elsewhere in the company. The evolution of Pixar from a struggling hardware company to an animation powerhouse began with a short film. Lasseter and his team created a computer-animated short called Tin Toy that won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. This success caught Disney's attention, and they attempted to lure Lasseter back, but he remained loyal to Pixar, believing in the unique creative culture they had built. Jobs, recognizing an opportunity, helped negotiate a deal with Disney to produce the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. The agreement was complex. Disney would provide funding and distribution, while lending some of their animation expertise to help Pixar create the film. However, the terms heavily favored Disney, giving them ownership of the characters and the right to make sequels with or without Pixar's involvement. Pixar would receive only 12.5% of the ticket revenues. The development of Toy Story marked a significant shift in Jobs' leadership style. Unlike his hands-on approach at Apple and Next, he took a more restrained role at Pixar. When providing feedback on the film, he would preface his comments with, "I'm not a filmmaker, but it seems to me," a stark contrast to his usual assertive style. This newfound respect for creative expertise would later prove crucial when he returned to Apple. The film's production wasn't without challenges. Early versions of Woody, the main character, came across as mean-spirited and unlikable. Disney executives were concerned, and the production was temporarily shut down. The Pixar team worked tirelessly to revise the story, making Woody more sympathetic while maintaining the film's emotional depth. Jobs supported the team through this crisis, demonstrating a growing ability to trust creative professionals to solve creative problems. As Toy Story neared completion, Jobs made another bold move. He decided to take Pixar public the week after the film's release. This was incredibly risky. If the movie flopped, the IPO would likely fail as well. But Jobs believed in the film and the company's potential. As he had done so many times before, he was betting big on innovation and artistic excellence. Toy Story premiered to universal acclaim in 1995. The film grossed $362 million worldwide and received enthusiastic reviews from critics, achieving a rare 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Just as importantly, it demonstrated that computer animation could create not just visual spectacle, but emotional storytelling that resonated with audiences of all ages. The week after the film's release, Pixar's initial public offering was a tremendous success. The stock doubled on its first day of trading. Jobs, who owned 80% of the company, saw his stake rise to $1.2 billion, a staggering return on his $50 million investment. With this newfound leverage, Jobs renegotiated Pixar's agreement with Disney, securing a much more favorable 50-50 split of profits. The success of Pixar taught Jobs valuable lessons about leadership and creativity. For the first time in his career, something he was involved with achieved greatness without his direct control over every detail. He learned that by trusting talented people and giving them the freedom to excel, he could enable the creation of masterpieces without micromanaging every decision. This revelation would profoundly influence his later leadership at Apple. During Jobs' absence, Apple entered a period of steady decline. The company that had revolutionized personal computing was now struggling to innovate. Under a succession of CEOs, Apple's product line became bloated and confusing, with numerous overlapping models that confused consumers. Market share dropped precipitously, falling to less than 1% of the computer market. By 1996, Apple was in crisis. The company had failed to develop a modern operating system to compete with Microsoft Windows, and their existing software was showing its age. The company's CEO, at the time, Gil Amelio, demonstrated his lack of strategic vision when asked about Apple's condition. "Apple is like a ship," he explained to journalist Gina Smith. "That ship is loaded with treasure, but there's a hole in the ship, and my job is to get everyone to row in the same direction." When Smith asked about fixing the hole, Amelio had no answer, a telling indication of Apple's rudderless leadership. Desperate for a new operating system, Apple began exploring options to purchase one from another company. In an ironic twist of fate, they turned to Next, attracted by its sophisticated operating system. The deal, worth approximately $400 million, brought Jobs back to Apple as an advisor to the chairman, a deliberately vague role that initially carried little actual authority. Jobs' return to Apple's campus was initially low-key. He had no office, no official responsibilities, and was ostensibly there only to help with the integration of Next's technology. However, his mere presence began to change the dynamics within the company. In meetings, he would often challenge the status quo with his characteristic directness. When shown Apple's confusing product lineup, he demanded, "What's wrong with this place?" After listening to mumbled responses, he declared, "The products suck. There's no sex in them anymore." While Amelio struggled to articulate a coherent vision for Apple's future, Jobs began methodically expanding his influence. He started reviewing each of Apple's products, requiring presentations without PowerPoint slides. He believed that people who know what they're talking about don't need PowerPoint. His critiques were characteristically blunt but incisive. In a decisive move, Jobs convinced the board to conduct a comprehensive product review. The company was producing over a dozen different computers, with confusing model numbers ranging from the Macintosh 1400 to the Macintosh 9600. During one particularly intense session, Jobs stopped the proceedings and went to a whiteboard. He drew a simple 2x2 grid. On one axis, he wrote consumer and pro. On the other, desktop and portable. "We need 4 great products, one for each quadrant," he declared. "That's it." The room fell silent. Some gasped. The idea of reducing Apple's entire product line to just 4 computers seemed radical, perhaps even reckless. But Jobs understood that focus, one of the key principles he had learned from his early days at Apple, was essential to recovery. By early 1997, it became clear that Amelio wasn't capable of turning Apple around. The company lost $1.6 billion under his leadership. Jobs, meanwhile, had been quietly laying the groundwork for a larger role. In July 1997, Apple's board asked for Amelio's resignation and named Jobs as interim CEO, the interim qualifier being Jobs' idea, as he wanted to assess the situation before making a full commitment. Upon becoming interim CEO, Jobs moved swiftly and decisively to reshape Apple. His first major strategic move was as surprising as it was controversial. He reached out to Bill Gates and Microsoft. Apple had a long-standing lawsuit against Microsoft over patent violations, but Jobs recognized that the company needed Microsoft's support to survive. In a characteristically direct phone call to Gates, he laid out the situation. "I'm going to turn this thing around," Jobs told Gates. Microsoft was walking over Apple's patents. "I said, if we kept up our lawsuits a few years from now, we could win $1 billion patent suit. You know it, and I know it. But Apple's not going to survive that long if we're at war. I know that. So let's figure out how to settle this right away." The resulting deal was transformative. Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple and committed to continuing development of Microsoft Office for Mac. Though some Apple loyalists saw this as a deal with the devil, it gave Apple the breathing room it needed to reinvent itself. The investment provided not just needed capital, but more importantly, a vote of confidence from Apple's biggest competitor. Jobs then turned to rebuilding Apple's brand identity. He reconnected with his old advertising agency, Chiat Day, to create a campaign that would redefine Apple's image. The result was the Think Different campaign, featuring black and white photographs of iconic innovators, artists, and rebels: Einstein, Gandhi, Bob Dylan, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, with the simple Apple logo and the words "Think Different" in the corner. The campaign wasn't about selling computers. It was about selling Apple's soul. As Jobs explained, we at Apple had forgotten who we were. One way to remember who you are is to remember who your heroes are. The campaign served multiple purposes. It restored pride among Apple employees, rebuilt consumer confidence, and positioned Apple not as a struggling computer maker, but as the standard bearer for creative thinking and innovation. Next, Jobs tackled Apple's product line. He eliminated 70% of the company's products, including printers and other peripherals. This focus allowed Apple to concentrate its resources on creating truly revolutionary products. The first of these would be the iMac, designed in collaboration with Jonathan Ive, who would become Jobs' closest creative partner at Apple. The iMac's development revealed a more mature Jobs, one who had learned from his experiences at Next and Pixar. While he remained intensely focused on design details, he had developed a better understanding of market realities. The iMac would be both beautiful and affordable, both revolutionary and practical. When Jobs unveiled the iMac in May 1998, he demonstrated his mastery of product presentation. After showing slides of existing beige box computers, he declared, "This is what computers look like today, and I'd like to take the privilege of showing you what they are going to look like from today on." The cloth was pulled back to reveal a striking blue and white translucent computer that looked unlike anything else on the market. The iMac proved to be exactly what Apple needed. Within its first 6 weeks, it sold 278,000 units, and by the end of the year, 800,000 machines had been purchased, making it the fastest-selling computer in Apple's history. The success validated Jobs' vision of combining cutting-edge technology with innovative design, but he was already looking toward the next revolution. By the late 1990s, the music industry was undergoing a dramatic transformation. Digital music in the form of MP3 files was becoming increasingly popular, especially among younger consumers. The dominant platform for obtaining these files was Napster, an illegal file-sharing service that allowed users to download music for free. The music industry was in chaos, struggling to adapt to this new digital reality. Jobs saw an opportunity. Existing MP3 players were clunky and difficult to use, with complicated interfaces and limited storage. He believed Apple could create something better, but his approach to developing the iPod demonstrated how much he had matured as a leader. Instead of dictating every detail, he set clear, ambitious parameters and let his team figure out how to achieve them. His primary demand was simplicity. Users should be able to access any function within 3 clicks. This seemed impossible, given the technical constraints of the time. How could users navigate through thousands of songs with just 3 clicks? The engineering team was stuck until they developed a breakthrough solution, the scroll wheel. This innovative interface allowed users to move quickly through long lists of songs without requiring multiple button presses. Jobs' obsession with user experience led to other crucial decisions. Rather than try to pack every function into the device itself, many features were offloaded to the computer. Users couldn't create playlists on the original iPod. This had to be done on their computer and then transferred over. This limitation, rather than hampering the device's success, actually made it simpler and more intuitive to use. The development of the iPod revealed another crucial aspect of Jobs' leadership philosophy. "The older I get, the more I see how much motivations matter," he explained. The Zune was crappy because the people at Microsoft don't really love music or art the way we do. We won because we personally love music. We made the iPod for ourselves, and when you're doing something for yourself or your best friend or family, you're not going to cheese out. When the iPod was released in late 2001, it was priced higher and had fewer features than many competing MP3 players. But its elegant design and intuitive interface made it an immediate success. Jobs understood that consumers would pay more for a product that delivered a superior user experience. The iPod would go on to sell more than 400 million units, becoming one of the most successful consumer products in history. Meanwhile, Pixar continued its remarkable run of success under Jobs' ownership. Following Toy Story, the studio released A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles. Each film was both a critical and commercial triumph. Even A Bug's Life, the least profitable of these films, earned $300 million at the box office. In 2006, Jobs sold Pixar to Disney for $7.4 billion, making him Disney's largest individual shareholder. In late 2003, at the height of Apple's resurgence, Jobs received devastating news. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Though initially keeping the diagnosis private, this brush with mortality had a profound effect on him. As colleague Andy Hertzfeld observed, "If you ask Steve for a favor, he might do the exact opposite. That was the perversity in his nature. Now he actually tries to be helpful." The experience seemed to soften some of his sharper edges while simultaneously intensifying his drive to create transformative products. During this period, Jobs and his team were secretly developing what would become the iPhone. The project began as a defensive move. Jobs recognized that mobile phones were beginning to incorporate music players, potentially threatening the iPod's dominance. As Art Levinson, an Apple board member, recalled, he was always obsessing about what could mess us up. The development of the iPhone showcased Jobs' evolved leadership style. 2 teams worked on different approaches simultaneously. One developing a phone with a click wheel like the iPod, the other pursuing an ambitious touchscreen interface. Rather than immediately dictating a direction, Jobs allowed both teams to develop their concepts. After months of parallel development, he gathered the teams and said simply, "We all know this is the one we want to do," pointing to the touchscreen version. "So let's make it work." The technical challenges were enormous. The touchscreen technology needed to be miniaturized to fit in a phone while remaining responsive and accurate. The device required a special type of glass called Gorilla Glass that only one company, Corning, could produce. When Corning's CEO said they couldn't manufacture it at the scale needed, Jobs fixed him with his famous stare and said, "Don't be afraid." When the CEO protested that fear wasn't the issue, they simply couldn't do it. Jobs replied, "Yes, you can do it. Get your mind around it. You can do it. Through sheer force of will and conviction, he pushed Corning to achieve what they thought impossible. The iPhone's development also revealed Jobs' mastery of product presentation. When he unveiled the device in January 2007, he created a moment of theatre that would become legendary. He began by announcing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. After letting the audience applaud for each, he revealed the punchline. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone. The iPhone would become the most successful product in history, with over 1 billion units sold. It fundamentally changed how people interact with technology and with each other, creating entire new industries around mobile computing and apps. Throughout this period of remarkable success, Jobs maintained the simplified lifestyle he had developed during his wilderness years. Despite being worth billions, he lived in a relatively modest Palo Alto neighborhood without security guards or a gated entrance. His son once referred to Larry Ellison as our rich friend, unaware that his own father was worth billions, demonstrating how Jobs had managed to maintain a sense of normalcy in his family life despite his enormous wealth and fame. In 2010, at what would prove to be the twilight of his career, Jobs unveiled what he considered one of his most important creations, the iPad. The device represented the culmination of his vision for personal computing, a machine so intuitive that anyone could use it. Though tablets had existed before, they had largely failed to capture the public's imagination. Jobs understood that the key was to create something that wasn't just a larger iPhone or a smaller laptop, but a device with its own identity and purpose. The iPad's development actually predated the iPhone. Apple had been experimenting with tablet computers since the early 2000s, but Jobs had insisted on shelving the project to focus on the phone first. This decision reflected his mature understandings of timing and focus, qualities he had sometimes lacked in his earlier years. He knew the technology needed to evolve further, and the market needed to be ready. When the iPad was finally revealed, its reception initially seemed modest compared to the iPhone's launch. However, it would go on to sell more than 350 million units and transform various industries from retail to education. The device perfectly embodied Jobs' philosophy of technology, serving humanity rather than the other way around. Its success seemed almost effortless, a stark contrast to the struggles of his earlier career. During this period, Jobs' cancer returned. Despite his declining health, he continued to work, channeling his remaining energy into ensuring Apple's future. He established a program called Apple University to teach future executives and managers the principles that had made the company successful. He also worked closely with Jonathan Ive to plan future products, including a reimagined Apple TV and early concepts for what would become the Apple Watch. Jobs approached death with the same clarity and directness that had characterized his life. He spoke openly about mortality, most notably in his 2005 Stanford commencement address. "Your time is limited," he told the graduates, "so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice." He compared life to a rainbow arcing across the horizon. You appear, have a chance to blaze in the sky, then you disappear. To know my arc will fall makes me want to blaze while I am in the sky. Not for others, but for myself, for the trail I know I am leaving. In his final months, Jobs focused on his family. He made it to his son Reed's high school graduation, a goal that had become deeply important to him. He worked with Walter Isaacson on his biography, hoping to leave an honest account of his life for his children. On October 5th, 2011, surrounded by his family, Steve Jobs passed away. His final words were reported to be, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." An expression of wonder that seemed fitting for a man who had spent his life pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His wife, Lorene, later shared what made Jobs unique. Steve's love of beauty pervaded everything he did. This appreciation for beauty, combined with his understanding of technology and human nature, enabled him to create products that weren't just functional, but transformative. He had learned to balance his demanding perfectionism with trust in others, his vision for the future with practical reality, his drive for success with personal fulfillment. Steve Jobs' influence extended far beyond the products he created. His journey transformed not just technology, but how we think about innovation, design, and the intersection of technology with human creativity. The arc of his life, from gifted but undisciplined entrepreneur to transformative business leader, offers profound lessons about personal growth and leadership. His early experiences in Silicon Valley proved crucial to his development. Growing up in what was still known as the Santa Clara Valley, surrounded by electronics companies and engineering innovation, Jobs absorbed an atmosphere of possibility. The region's unique combination of technical innovation and counterculture thinking shaped his worldview. He witnessed how companies like Hewlett-Packard operated and saw firsthand how technology could change the world. Jobs' relationship with his adoptive parents, Paul and Clara Jobs, deeply influenced his character. Paul's attention to craft and detail in his garage workshop instilled in Steve an appreciation for quality workmanship that would later become legendary. Clara's early teaching of reading before school demonstrated the value of education outside traditional structures, perhaps contributing to Jobs' later skepticism of conventional wisdom. The transformation in Jobs' leadership style between his first and second tenures at Apple was remarkable. In his early years, his reality distortion field often pushed people beyond their limits, but could also drive them away. During his exile period, particularly through his experiences at Pixar, he learned to balance his demanding nature with trust in others' expertise. He discovered that great things could happen when he enabled talented people rather than trying to control every detail. Jobs' marketing principles, learned from Mike Markkula, empathy, focus, and impute, became fundamental to Apple's success. Understanding customer needs better than they understood themselves, eliminating unnecessary choices to concentrate on excellence, and ensuring every aspect of a product's presentation conveyed quality. These principles revolutionized how technology companies approach product development and marketing. His obsession with design transcended mere aesthetics. Jobs understood that design was about how things work, not just how they look. This philosophy resulted in products that were not just beautiful, but intuitive. The original Macintosh, the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad each redefined their categories by making complex technology accessible through thoughtful design. Jobs' influence on animation through Pixar cannot be overstated. What began as a technology company became, under his ownership and through his support of John Lasseter's creative vision, the most successful animation studio in history. Pixar's films demonstrated that computer animation could achieve not just technical excellence, but emotional depth. Perhaps most significantly, Jobs showed that commercial success and artistic integrity were not mutually exclusive. His famous quote, "It's not the customer's job to know what they want," reflected his belief that true innovation requires vision beyond market research. He proved that creating products of genuine beauty and utility could also create immense value. Jobs' impact on modern technology went far beyond individual products. He fundamentally changed how humans interact with computers, transforming them from complex machines that required technical expertise into intuitive devices that anyone could use. This democratization of technology began with the graphical user interface of the Macintosh and reached its apex with the iPhone's touchscreen interface, which even young children could master. His influence on product presentation became legendary. Jobs transformed product launches from dry technical announcements into theatrical events that captured global attention. The formula he perfected, building anticipation, creating moments of drama, and delivering one more thing at the end, has been widely imitated but rarely matched. His presentations weren't just about showing products. They were about telling stories that help people understand how technology could enrich their lives. The business principles Jobs developed continue to influence companies worldwide. His insight that focus means saying no to good ideas so you can say yes to great ones has become a fundamental principle of product development. His belief in vertical integration, controlling both hardware and software, challenged the conventional wisdom of specialization and has been increasingly adopted by other technology companies. Jobs' personal growth journey offers particularly valuable lessons. His early career was marked by brilliant insights, but also by serious flaws. His treatment of his daughter Lisa, his often cruel management style, his reality distortion field that sometimes denied obvious truths. Yet rather than being destroyed by his failures, he learned from them. His time in the wilderness after leaving Apple taught him crucial lessons about trusting others and managing his demanding nature. The relationship between Jobs and his chosen successor, Tim Cook, demonstrated his growing wisdom. Where the younger Jobs might have sought someone similar to himself, he chose Cook precisely because their strengths were different. Cook's operational expertise complemented Jobs' creative vision, ensuring Apple's continued success after his departure. Jobs' view of mortality shaped his approach to life and work. As he told Stanford graduates, death is very likely the single best invention of life. It clears out the old to make way for the new. This acceptance of life's finite nature drove his intensity and his desire to create lasting impact. It also influenced his view of legacy. He worked with Walter Isaacson on his biography not for personal glory, but to help his children understand him better. The complex relationship between Jobs' personal life and his professional achievements offers important insights. His marriage to Laureen Powell provided stability that enabled his creative risks. Their relatively normal family life, living in an ungated house, eating dinner together regularly, limiting their children's technology use, demonstrated that innovation didn't require isolation from normal human experience. Jobs embodied the power of intuition in decision-making. He advocated spending time alone, particularly walking at sunset and looking at the sky, to develop and trust one's intuitive feelings. His success came not from market research or focus groups, but from a deep understanding of human desires and needs, often before people themselves recognized them. Ultimately, Jobs represented the marriage of technology and liberal arts, a combination he viewed as crucial for innovation. He showed that technical excellence alone wasn't enough. It needed to be paired with human understanding and artistic sensibility to create truly revolutionary products. As he explained, there are very few companies that have good taste. Very few companies have good design sense. When I say design sense, I mean taste. Our goal is just to make things that are really wonderful. Perhaps Jobs' most profound legacy lies in how he changed our relationship with technology. Before Apple's innovations, computers were seen as complex tools, intimidating to most users. Jobs understood that technology needed to feel inviting, even magical. His insistence on closed ecosystems, though criticized by some as controlling, ensured a seamless user experience that made technology accessible to everyone. This democratization of technology had far-reaching social implications. The iPhone, for instance, didn't just create a new product category. It fundamentally changed how people interact with the world around them. From navigation to photography, from communication to entertainment, the smartphone revolution Jobs initiated has reshaped nearly every aspect of modern life. Jobs' influence on retail was equally transformative. The Apple Store concept, which many initially ridiculed, reinvented the retail experience. Rather than merely selling products, Apple stores became interactive spaces where people could experience technology firsthand. The store's design reflected Jobs' perfectionism. Even the angle of laptop screens was precisely specified to encourage customers to adjust them, thereby engaging with the products. His management philosophy, though often harsh, contained valuable insights. Jobs believed that A players prefer working with other A players, and that allowing mediocrity would drive away excellence. While his methods of enforcing these standards could be brutal, the underlying principle that maintaining high standards attracts and retains top talent has influenced corporate culture throughout the technology industry. Jobs also demonstrated the value of selective disclosure in business strategy. He understood that mystery and anticipation were powerful marketing tools, leading to Apple's famous secrecy about upcoming products. Yet he also knew when transparency was valuable, as shown by his candid discussions with his biographer in his final years. The evolution of his leadership style offers particular insights. The young Jobs often wielded his reality distortion field indiscriminately, pushing people beyond their limits. The mature Jobs learned to deploy this power more strategically, using it to inspire rather than intimidate. As he told his team during the iPhone development, "We all know this is the one we want to do, so let's make it work." Jobs' personal life reflected similar growth. His early rejection of his daughter Lisa contrasts sharply with his later devotion to his family. His marriage to Laureen Powell Jobs brought stability and perspective to his life. Despite his wealth and fame, they created a remarkably normal family environment, eating dinner together regularly and limiting their children's use of technology. A telling detail from someone who made his fortune from technological devices. His views on mortality, shaped by his battle with cancer, added depth to his business philosophy. "Remembering that you are going to die," he told Stanford graduates, "is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." This awareness of life's finite nature drove his relentless pursuit of excellence and innovation. In his final years, Jobs focused on ensuring his legacy would continue through the company he had built. Apple University, his initiative to teach future leaders the principles behind Apple's success, reflected his understanding that maintaining a corporate culture requires deliberate effort. He worked to institutionalize not just his design principles and attention to detail, but the philosophy that had driven Apple's renaissance. The belief that technology should serve humanity's needs while maintaining the highest standards of quality and beauty. The story of Steve Jobs is ultimately about transformation, of industries, of technology, of business practice, and of Jobs himself. From a college dropout making illegal blue boxes to the leader of the world's most valuable company. From a young man who denied his own daughter to a devoted family man. From a demanding perfectionist who drove people away to a leader who inspired them to achieve the impossible. Jobs' journey demonstrates the potential for growth and change, while staying true to one's fundamental values and vision. His last words, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow," seemed to encapsulate his lifelong sense of wonder at the possibilities that lay just beyond the current horizon. In his passing, he left not just a successful company or revolutionary products, but a template for how vision, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence can transform both technology and human experience.